So we are here and now we're going to have a fireside chat on the topic of understanding gap, learning to think like an SME bank. And I'm very glad to be joined here in this conversation by John Mark Williams, CEO at the Institute of Leadership and Management. And previously, John headed Agile Business Consortium. And before that, John was head of Breakthrough at Santander UK. Hello, John, and I'm very glad to have you today. John, we don't hear you. Can you check, please, your microphone?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, now we can hear you. Perfect.
And I can then repeat, I'm delighted to be here, really, and it's great to see you again.
So we decided to discuss now the understanding gap between banks, policymakers, and between SMEs. And you did the paper on the gap theory, where is the understanding gap is the basic. So this is actually the gap between customers' expectations and bank perception. And of course, the smaller it is, the more SME customers are happy with the banking services. So which factors contribute to this understanding gap, John?
Well, I think the two things which are really straightforward that cause the understanding gap between banks and SMEs are difference and distance. And what I mean by that is, first of all, difference. If we think children, for example, they're not just small versions of adults. They are different from adults. In exactly the same way, SMEs are not merely small versions of corporates. They are different in nature, and consequently, they need a different skill set and a different understanding of how they work and what they do from engagement with corporates. And of course, banks are very used to dealing with corporates, not least because banks are corporates themselves. So in the same way as a bank would have a specific set of skills for retail bankers, business corporate bankers, for wealth managers, the bank also needs to have a specific set of skills for SME bankers. And that specific set of skills can only come from understanding what it is that SMEs need. So the other element of this difference is distance. And the reason why distance is so important is that there is always a limitation on the data that a bank can collect about potential customers, indeed, even about its existing customers. And if we add to that the size of a bank, the number of layers of management between a bank policymaker and an SME customer in the marketplace, there is a distance between those two, both in terms of physical distance, if you like, how many different layers an SME opinion needs to go through before it reaches a bank policymaker, and also a virtual distance between the bank's understanding through data and the SME's reality. And I think those two things, the difference in, I'll call it mindset between the bank and the SME, and the distance between the bank and the opportunity for it to understand the SME's reality, those two things cause the understanding gap.
Mm-hmm. Yes, you mentioned the skills that SME bankers have to have, and they surely should be different from the ones which are working for the corporate customers. So my question is how to achieve this think like SME mindset, and also in the bank. And also, do you think that just because this recent very big changes happening connected with the pandemic, and I think that SMEs having new challenges this year are changing so fast, even compared to the last year's business situation. So do you think that connected with this situation, SME managers and bankers that are making product for this segment, should they have another set of the skills even compared to themselves a year ago?
Right. Okay. Good questions. Good questions. First of all, how to get the set of skills for SME bankers that they will need to deal effectively with SMEs. There is an old phrase that says, the things we need to learn before we can do them, we learn by doing them. In some ways, if a banker does not have SME experience, then that person will need to engage with SMEs and actually experience the reality of their life before that person can understand how the SME works and functions and what skills as a banker they will need to bring. And opportunities, for example, opportunities like having a secondment of SME bankers into an SME, SME bankers work shadowing SME owners or SME directors for a period of time just to get closer, because it is not possible to learn the skills necessary to be an effective SME banker from a book. It's not possible to learn it from listening to me. It requires the SME bankers to experience the SME reality. That's a generic statement. If we think about the effect of the pandemic on the necessary skills for SME bankers, I think it was Jeff Bezos that said, in a market, focus always on the things that do not change. For Amazon, for example, it would be customers will always want lower prices and faster deliveries. So Amazon focuses on those two things in particular. SME bankers need to discover and understand what it is that doesn't change in the life of the SME. And things like the fact that they live much closer to break even than a bank lives. And that affects the way that an SME makes decisions. They think about cost, not value, for example. They think about time, because time is an investment for an SME far more than a large corporate. A large corporate can run for 2 or 3 years, maybe 5 years at a loss and still exist. An SME cannot do this. So as far as getting SME skills or SME banking skills is concerned, SME bankers need to experience the SME reality as much as they can, as closely as possible. And as far as the pandemic is concerned, all it has done is exaggerate or accentuate the impact on SMEs that was there already from doing business in a real market. So for SME bankers, the pandemic simply requires them to focus on those things that do not change for the SME.
Maybe this will be, useful for the SME bankers to have a kind of practice, at SMEs business at place, to really understand how SMEs are working and living these days. By the way, did you have kind of such practices at Santander UK back then?
Yes, we had a system where we would engage the SME bankers with a client and get them to get really close to that client, to spend a lot of time with, first of all, with the board. If it was a customer turning over 10 or 15 or 20 million, to sit with the members of the board, with the directors, to sit in on board meetings, to start to feel a bit more of the company. If it's a smaller business, it's actually a lot more difficult, because it takes time to understand how a business works. It takes time to understand how a bank works. It takes just as long to understand how an SME works. So we did have some deliberate engagement between SMEs and the bankers in Santander, with some success, I must admit. Also, it's worth remembering that some bankers either are running a business also themselves, because lots of people are running small businesses online, or they actually, some of them, have come from an SME background or have family members or close friends who run SMEs. Those will have more access to the requisite skills than people who have no SME experience. And we found some examples of that within Santander as well.
Great. And my last question to you will be the following. So you mentioned that SMEs are very often operating on the edge of the break-even. So they are more agile by nature, compared to the banks and to the all other corporations. So, and they demand very fast decisions. For example, like during these crisis times, to cover their financial gaps. And banks or other financial companies, they are very often not able to deliver it so fast as the SMEs require. And then when they deliver, the SMEs can be, have debt already. So how actually to cover this gap? So I know that, we did with you all this Agile Mondays series, and I really invite all our attendees to watch all the series, all the episodes on our YouTube channel. But can you summarize here in this answer how to cover this gap, how to make banks become more agile here and be closer to SMEs in this way?
Yeah, well, I can give a very simple answer, or at least I can give a straightforward answer. It's definitely not easy to do. It involves two things. The first is to devolve decisions around SME products and services as close to the SME as possible. So that means actually not just regional directors, but to those SME bankers who are dealing with the companies themselves. The challenge of that for the bank, of course, is managing the risk, because the further from the core control of the bank a decision is made, the greater the risk the bank perceives. However, banks are in the business of risk, so there is no reason why they shouldn't be able to manage that. So devolving decisions is the first thing. The second thing is thinking about flexibility in products and services, because in a way, one of the reasons why SMEs need rapid responses from banks is that the planning that SMEs go through is not always as forward-thinking as it might be in a large corporate. Because they need to respond very quickly, they are successful partly because they can respond very quickly. SMEs tend to get into the habit of being reactive and responsive very quickly. And many don't have an awful lot of time to plan ahead. So planning with the SME, flexibility in products and services, can sometimes remove the need to have to react really rapidly, because the resilience of the SME will be improved by that flexibility and the opportunity. There are a couple of things here which are very important. If we are expecting SME bankers to have decisions devolved to them, then we need to think about three things: how we measure their success, how we train those SME bankers, and who we actually recruit to be SME bankers, particularly with this understanding gap in mind. And then on the flexibility side, we need to think about co-creating products and services for SMEs with SMEs themselves. And those things like work shadowing or seconding or spending time can actually help with that. Because I think in the end, one of the things that I think that bank policymakers often don't recognize, and I'm sure many of the SME bankers in your audience will recognize this, SME banking, effective SME banking, is a competitive advantage. And all of the things that we are talking about, all of the things that your audience are hearing today, the reason why the SME Banking Club exists is because there's an opportunity there for competitive advantage. And one of the things that I would like to see is much more emphasis at the policy level within banks to recognize the competitive advantage that SME banking can